Joined now by Bill Gertz. He's the senior editor of the Washington Free Beacon. He's also a national security columnist for the Washington Times. Welcome to the program.
Hi, good to be on the show.
Yeah, it's great to have you, especially with this breaking story. The Russia is building a nuclear-armed drone submarine.
Yeah, it's a big story. It's just published today, this morning. I've been working on it for quite a while. It's basically the codenamed Canyon, K-A-N-Y-O-N, and it's a large unmanned underwater vehicle, or UUV, which will carry a huge warhead, something in the range of 5 megatons to 10 megatons. And a megaton is the equivalent of 1 million tons of TNT. So this is for use against harbors where we keep our nuclear submarines, such as Kings Bay, Georgia, or Puget Sound in Washington State, or against coastal cities. But it's certainly an alarming development because it shows that the Russians are very serious about building up their nuclear forces. Again, this is a developmental program. It's some years away, but it's a big story, that the fact that they are building this new Canyon unmanned underwater vehicle.
Does this violate their agreement?
Well, underwater nuclear weapons are not covered by the New START Arms Treaty. That was supposed to be the big treaty that the Obama administration signed. But, of course, that treaty was signed at the same time the Russians had violated the 87 INF, or Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, by building a missile that can travel 300 to 3,000 miles. Arms control is kind of dead with the Russians at this point, based on the Russian military annexation of Crimea and continued destabilization in that part of the world, as well as threats against other Eastern European states.
So, because you have another article out, and by the way, folks, at the freebeacon.com, it's just freebeacon.com is the website for the Washington Free Beacon, that Cruz is calling on the president because to release the Pentagon report on the Russian missile violation. And what you're saying is, yeah, they're violating left, right, and center because basically the treaty's meaningless at this point.
Well, yes. This was a significant Cold War-era treaty, the 87 INF Treaty, and the Russians were violating it as early as 2008. And the New START Treaty was signed and ratified by the Senate in 2010. And so this was kept secret from Republican senators who agreed to ratify the New START Treaty. Again, a kind of a duplicitous negotiating strategy. You have to understand the Obama administration's national security policy is driven by this notion of arms control. Do an agreement, even if no one follows it but the U.S., so in a sense it's just constraining the U.S., and then ignore violations by other parties, and in this case it's Russia.
Right. Well, I mean, he got himself into trouble, and we should have seen the writing on the wall when he set the red line for Syria and then said, oh, I never said there was a red line. I mean,
right.
we could have seen it there. But it sounds like Putin has taken a page from Obama's playbook. You can keep your treaty if you like your treaty.
Yeah, lies and disinformation. I've been a Russian specialty for decades. They're very well-versed in the use of strategic misdirection and disinformation. It's kind of of course, Putin was a part of the KGB, which was, that was one of their standard features, was to be able to deceive and mislead foreign publics. And yeah, that's another problem with the Russians right now. They're engaged in what the Pentagon is calling a hybrid warfare. So there's traditional kinetic warfare, and then there's this new information warfare that uses propaganda, influence operations, cyber attacks, a whole range of non-kinetic kind of warfare things. Chinese are also
photos of Putin without his shirt on.
Yeah,
that was a big one.
Yes, yes. The macho Russian Stalin of the 2000s.
By the way, did you see the photo that the White House must have circulated this? I don't know how else it would have gotten out. Is Obama holding a fish with two Alaskan female fishermen?
Yes.
And he's the only one wearing gloves.
Yeah.
I swear. Well, and the two Alaskan female fishermen are like, "Yep, we're fishermen, and that's we use our hands." And he's wearing these bright orange gloves, and nobody saw that as like a photo mishap. I was talking earlier about Reagan and the leadership that he showed, which we just haven't seen since Reagan. We simply haven't seen that kind of leadership, that kind of pride in America. And I'll go back to the talks with Gorbachev. When he walked out, this was in Reykjavik, and Reagan walked out. Gorby had arrived. Reagan greeted him. He got there early to greet him as if this is my house and you're coming to visit me, which put Gorbachev at kind of a visual disadvantage. But more than that, Reagan wasn't wearing a coat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
he knew how to do those kinds of things.
Right. And now and Putin, of course, it took a page from that playbook. So we had the whole, you remember, it was a couple of years ago, we had a whole barrage of Putin photos of him fishing and him riding horseback without a shirt on and all that. And that's part and parcel. And I'm not making fun. I'm just saying that you said it yourself. It's a whole strategy. It's comprehensive, all the way down to the propagandist photos that they circulate. And they get the media to go along with it. And unfortunately, our media is working with Obama, who clearly is not working on behalf of the United States, because you can keep your health care if you like, you can keep your doctor if you like it, and you can keep your treaty if you like it. And so it's the American people who are on the losing end of each one of these deals. And now we've got the Iran deal. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, this is the worst international agreement that I've ever come across in more than 30 years of covering national security issues. I mean, there's just no there. It's just, it can be summed up in one word, and that's appeasement. The idea that you reach an agreement with a terrorist sponsor, in fact, the leading sponsor of state terrorism, Iran, that somehow is going to be abided by the regime in Tehran, which, shows no willingness to do that. This is a radical Islamist regime that has an agenda, and that agenda includes getting nuclear weapons, despite their lies and disinformation. They're on the path to building nuclear weapons. They're already on the path to building missiles of various ranges. Currently can hit all of Europe, and down the pike they want to build a missile that can reach the United States. So to think that they're going to somehow delay or postpone an Iranian Islamic bomb is kind of just a fool's errand. And that has come out in a lot of the reporting on things like inspections, things like what the Iranians are required to do. First of all, reveal what they did in the past on their nuclear arms. There's nothing in the agreement. There's two side agreements that we haven't even seen that are supposed to resolve unanswered questions about their past nuclear weapons work, which include some very significant things like high explosives tests against the spherical shape, which is the basis for how you set off a nuclear device.
We are not confused about what Iran's goals are. We could argue, because you brought up appeasement, and we could argue Chamberlain was misinformed. He refused to see what was right in front of his face, but Hitler talked only about peace. Hitler's speeches were all about peace and how peace and prosperity and good things will come and all that while he was building up his military. But it was all about peace. We don't even have those assurances from Iran, and we're walking into this deal.
Absolutely.
And I've read. Did you read the piece by Andrew McCarthy talking about how the Corker legislation is already null and void, and they don't need to abide by it?
Right. Yeah, that was another mistake. The idea that somehow that giving Congress a review, a limited review under the Corker-Cardin legislation, would somehow satisfy the treaty requirements. What that did was basically eliminated the Senate's constitutional authority to provide advice and consent for all international treaties and agreements. The administration sought to avoid that treaty ratification battle by calling it an executive agreement. And then they went, on top of that, they went to the UN and got the UN to endorse the agreement, as if somehow that carried more weight than the U.S. Constitution and the Senate's advice and consent role. I mean, it's just one thing after another with this.
But they believe that.
Yeah.
That's the problem, is they're selling democracy down the river in exchange for one world government. That's what they believe. And the American people are seemingly so somnambulant that they don't quite get it. They can't quite see it. But McCarthy argues that part of the requirements for the Corker legislation to sort of be in effect is that the entirety of the deal be exposed within 5 days of it being agreed to. And it wasn't, of course. We have the side deals that Kerry never even read, that he never saw, that had to do with the IAEA. The other thing is that the IAEA has to be solvent. It has to prove that it's solvent and can perform the inspections. And the IAEA has said, we've run out of money. We need $10 million to proceed with inspections. So the whole thing's a mess. The question is whether the Republicans in Congress are going to stand up and stand up for the American people and stand up for peace. And what do you think?
Well, it doesn't look like they are, because there's two ways under the Corker legislation. There's two aspects to this. One is you can issue a resolution of disapproval, and that can be vetoed by the president. And that's probably what they're going to do, and they're going to get vetoed, and then they won't be able to override the veto. The other tactic that Congress has considered is to issue a resolution of approval, approving the Iran deal, but adding extensive and strenuous conditions, things like having to reveal the IAEA secret agreements, having to have the real snapback sanctions that also were eliminated at the last minute. Whether or not Congress will do that is not clear, but I've been talking to some congressional people, and that's one of the options they've considered, and that would seem like a good way to go about it. In other words, you pass a law stating that we approve this, but only under these conditions, and make them very strong conditions. The other way to scuttle the deal would be for Congress to get the votes, and again, they need enough of a majority to override a veto, would be to impose new sanctions on Iran, because the agreement states very specifically that Iran will withdraw if it gets any new sanctions on it.
Oh, yeah. All right, I've got to take a break. Sorry, we've run out of time. It's great speaking with you, Bill Gertz, the senior editor for the Washington Free Beacon. We'll have you back on. I got to take a quick break. When we come back,